Okay, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Invaluable Educator with my co-host, Jeff. Hey, Jeff.
Hey everyone, great to see you guys again.
Yeah, so on this episode, we are talking about being scheduled out, okay? Listen, a lot of folks don't know about the nitty gritty of what goes on in the school day, what time kids need to be there, what time they need to leave, except for parents, of course, and then like how the schedule is rolled out. I touched upon this in the beginning, I think in our first episode, sometimes around the idea that kids hardly have time to socialize, they don't have time to move their bodies, which especially when they're in middle school, that adolescent age is extremely important for them to really hone in on those social skills, to get some of that energy out, to run around, to be able to stretch. And yet we're asking them to sit down in learning math and reading for 90 blocks, sometimes 120-minute blocks at a time. And we know, even as adults, that sitting for 90 minutes or 120 minutes is not the best thing. And then there's also just been general research saying that sitting for long periods of time is almost as bad as smoking cigarettes. Okay, and yet we have the kids doing this mostly every day. So let me just break down the schedule, and then Jeff, I would love to hear your thoughts and your
Sure.
reactions from here. But generally speaking, kids usually are at school sometime between 7:30, maybe 7:45. If they're older, sometimes they can get in as late as 8. But think about that. As late as 8 o'clock is how early they need to start their day and get their brains ready to go. And I think for younger kids, that's okay. You know, kindergarten, etc. Those kids naturally they wake up by 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and they're rearing to go. Anyone who has a young child knows that from 7 to 7 they are, they're running up and down and they're ready. And sometimes they take their naps too during the day. But by the time kids get to adolescent age, they actually, just like when they were young, they need 12 hours of sleep. Their brains are actually developing. It's a really fraught time. It's probably so the times that your brain develops the most is first when you're first born and you're getting acclimated into the world. The next big time when your brain needs so much energy and things are happening and you're totally changing is when you're in your adolescent stage, right? So that can go from anywhere from 10 to 16, and now we see that our frontal lobes are not even completely developed until age 24, 25 now. So during that time, people need a lot of sleep, 12 hours of sleep. That when your body is resting is really when it's being, is really when those neurons are firing. It's really when they're getting that recharge. And and then kids don't go to sleep early. So they've got work, they've got school, they've got homework, so they've got extracurricular activities. So the older they get, the more things they have to do outside of school, the less time they actually have for sleep. But yet they still need to be ready to go by like 7. And don't get me started if they have to take the bus, right? So that sometimes means that they have to wake up at 5:30, 5 something in the morning just to
Yes,
catch that bus. I hear you shaking your head. Did
yes.
you catch the bus going to school?
Oh, absolutely. I had to wake up at 5 a.m. I had to be there bright and early, and this before the sun even is risen.
That's
You're
right.
walking out to that bus stop, and yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like as you get to the adult point, like you begin to look at 5 a.m. as like, oh, I have extra time to start my day, right? But when you're a child and you have all these, like you said, extracurriculars, you have all this homework that you need to get done before the next day, you have all this pressure. And also, you just need to be a full human being too. You need to have that social time as well. You have all this pressure to try to cram everything into this small pocket of time and still be ready to go by 5 a.m., especially if you're a bus rider. If you're 7 a.m., it's a little bit nicer, but
Yeah,
still it's a lot of it's definitely crammed for sure.
yeah. So then, of course, that's on your way going to school. And then, if you're waking up that early, 2 hours in advance, it might take you that long to get home from school. Right. So, and that's without any extracurricular activities. You still might take you an hour, hour and a half to get home, depending on the bus route, how many kids are on the bus, blah, 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 blah. So already you've got a really long day. That is already not conducive to your brain development, to you having the most optimal environment to receive information, to process information, to analyze information, to interact with people. Then you get to the school day, and I hate to say it this way, but a lot of the schools that I go to, especially schools that have folks that look like us in the as the majority of the student body, they really feel like prison systems. Oftentimes you're going through
Mm,
security. So that's not a good feeling. The school itself is, it's cement blocks. It looks like a prison from outside, other than the thing that says it's a school. Maybe that's what makes you know that it's a school. Oftentimes it's dark, right? There's not the cleanliness, not the most clean.
Yes.
Okay. I've worked in schools where I've seen dead mice, roaches. I mean, okay,
Ooh.
this is not cute. And we know that some of these schools also have asbestos problems. Some of them have problems with their water supply, meaning that there's lead in the water, which we know is not great for for student learning.
Definitely.
So you've got all of these already health things. This is what you're walking into. So you've got security guards there, you've got metal detectors there. So it already feels like an unsafe place, frankly, because you're going through all that. And then there's just so many stringent rules around your uniform and how you can dress, and it depends on how stringent they are. Sometimes they don't want you talking in the hallway, so you can't even talk to your friends. You have to walk in a straight line from one class to the next classroom, right? So like there's all of these ways that we are constricting and confining students and confining the natural energy and the creativity that we have as human beings and as youth. And I will say, and I like to point this out because I went to private school. Private school is not like this. It's totally different. It's like nice and airy, and it's like beautiful. So a lot of times, you're thinking to yourself, well, why is it that some schools look like XYZ, primarily public schools, and other schools where, we know students are quote unquote getting better education, and yet they don't seem to have to worry about how the kids move through the hallway. They have a lot more freedom in their schedule. So yeah, so let me talk about the actual schedule. So then you go, you sit down, maybe you have a little homeroom, you're doing a little breakfast, if your school offers breakfast, which I think is great. A lot of students don't have access to food and breakfast at that point in time. Can you give me 1 second? Hold on. Sorry.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Could you hear that? I was like, my friend decided to just start vacuuming upstairs. Okay, anyway, the beautiful things about being on the podcast. Thankfully, I did the recording. So anyway, I'll edit this part out.
That's okay.
We'll keep it in as a blooper. I don't know. So anyway, back to what we're doing. Okay. And then then they start their first class of the day. And like I said, a lot of schools lately have gone into what they're calling block schedules. So it's like maybe 4 or 5 periods throughout the day that are literally 120 minutes each. And then the kids maybe get gym and art. So they're like intertwined. So one day you might have gym, one day you have art. So maybe you have gym 2 days a week or 3 days a week, or you have art 2 days a week, 3 days a week. These are the outlets where kids can be creative, get all their energy out. Physical activity we know is super important. It's something that we need to have on a daily basis, and yet we don't even think about making sure that that's scheduled in every single day. I don't know. When I went to private school, I had recess all the way through until I was in 8th grade, and then I had like a lot of free time when I went to high school. That is not the case for our students. They don't get time like recess. They don't have that. They don't have gym. It's like, when do they get the time to actually run around, run their energy? And then you wonder why they're so disruptive in the classroom. Well, of course they're disruptive in the classroom because you have them sitting for hours at a time. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
I want to actually mention, like, I think onto that point as well, there are different learning styles. Some are kinesthetic learners, some are auditory, some are musical learners, others are linguistic. So it's like there's a lot of different learning styles, and imagine that they're all being subjected to, again, having to sit and rotely memorize all these concepts for all these hours. And it makes me think about the scheduling, right? And I did some research here, and I want to point out Finland, for instance. Like when it comes to Finland's model of scheduling, they have later start times, shorter days, minimal homework, and high teacher autonomy, which is essentially like what you're all about. You're about the teacher autonomy and about the teachers designing curriculums that actually benefit the students, right? And the outcomes. And they consistently rank top in PISA scores, strong student well-being, and low dropout rates, which is something that we definitely need more of over here, especially in the United States of America, I would
Yeah,
say.
I'm glad that you brought up Finland because they're an interesting case for a couple of reasons. So Finland started modeling their school system actually after the United States, but in the United States back in the 60s and 70s, I believe. And then sort of the 80s came around and became much more stringent around what school looked like, sounded like. And then, of course, those of us in education know all about No Child Left Behind, which happened under the Bush administration, which is where the Common Core standards came, and where the emphasis on testing has gone, and testing has just become, frankly, I think, a monopoly to make money, quite frankly, in the educational system. More money goes into testing than it does into like salaries or anything like that. And frankly, what are we actually testing for? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't find, and anyway, we could do a whole nother thing around standardized tests, because I don't find that standardized tests are all that meaningful, to be quite frank, and they're not a predictor of people's life outcomes and success within an organization. Yeah, and like you said, it's been the same publishers every time, so there is a monopoly. So I mentioned this before around budget. How you budget your money shows like what you value, and I think the same thing is true around the schedule, which is why I wanted to go there. But if we're talking about the testing thing, there is lots of money in education. In fact, we could switch how much we spend on testing and switch that into teacher salaries, and we would be in a much better place. We wouldn't have to really tax anyone more, et cetera, because I think a lot of people are concerned about the higher taxes, which we get. As a taxpayer in the United States, I don't like the lack of transparency around where my taxes are going, and I do think we're taxed out. So I understand folks being like, I don't want to have a higher tax bracket necessarily, as it relates to property tax. So property tax is usually the main way that public schools are funded. But really, there's buku dollars in the educational system. But what you have is a monopoly of corporations who take the majority of that money when it really should go to the people. And so that's again where I'm saying we're having a disconnect. We can easily shift the budget so that the majority of that budget really goes to teacher salaries, where we show the worth around teachers, and then we start really taking away the emphasis on standardized tests, take the emphasis away around the monopoly around textbooks. So we're seeing that happen, or hopefully we will start seeing that happen.
Yes.
We certainly are seeing colleges not emphasizing the SAT and SAT as much anymore. At least that was a movement. I don't know exactly where that is going, but we're seeing more and more people honestly realizing that higher education is not always the truth anyway, but certainly SAT and ACT scores are not necessarily an indicator of how intelligent you are, and nor how much you will be able to contribute to society, nor how much money you're going to make, right? So like all of these things are not even particularly aligned any longer. I mean, maybe there was a time when that was true, but it's certainly we're seeing over and over again not true currently. And so again, we see the monopoly, and then don't even get me started on student loan debt and how that's another monopoly that's happening currently in the country. And that's the one loan that even if you file for bankruptcy and even if you die, that never goes away. So like that's insane to me. And yet, we want our people to go in debt. Why else are we telling them to go to college? And they're like, oh yeah, we just get a loan. Kids are 18 years old. Oh yeah, get this $40,000 loan. They don't know what that means, right? They don't know what interest rate means. They don't know what the principal means. So then they're 40 some years old. Like, wait, I only took out $20,000 or whatever the case may be. How do I still owe $20,000 after paying for 20 years? Okay, so let's talk about the real deal of what's going on. So anyway, I say that all to say that the money exists. Actually, we just need to change the systematize in the structure. Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
So 2 points I want to make on that, because you mentioned the money, and I want to mention this stat. So back in 2020, I was looking at, I was working at an education tech startup, and I was looking at how much money College Board made. I think my roommate told me it was like 71 million. And yeah, and they're a nonprofit organization. And you mentioned the money being in education. I'm like, okay, then what does College Board typically represent, right? It represents standardized testing for SAT, for PSAT, all of that kind of stuff, right? And I'm pretty sure they probably expanded their ecosystem since then. But it's significant that they would rake in that much money just from standardized testing, and yet teachers have been underpaid, and yet curriculums have been underfunded, especially when it comes to the creative aspects that are going to really simulate those qualities that humans need to thrive in the times that we're entering into right now. And additionally, another thing that you mentioned, so you mentioned the money, but you also mentioned the, I think you mentioned, was it the not scheduling? I'll come back to it, but the money was a very, very significant part because it shows that we can reallocate
That's right.
the dollars to go ahead and be in the right things. I think that's what it really shows.
Yeah, and I mentioned student loan debt. So did you want to say something about that, maybe?
That's it, the student loan debt. When it comes to that, what I understand is that student loans used to be way lower. But I think as a result of, you know, uh, higher education institutions feeling that, okay, they're going to be subsidized anyway. The students that are coming, they're going to be subsidized anyway.
That's
So
right.
they're not the ones paying directly. Let's go ahead and charge a higher price.
Uh-huh.
Is what I heard is what brought the
Oh,
prices all
yeah.
the way up. And it's like you're fighting against human nature. You're fighting against business, mechanics here, right? People are probably going to charge a higher price when they perceive you have a higher means, and when they perceive that it's more easily accessible. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to, okay, the money's going to come in anyway, right? As opposed to, I'm not sure if the students are willing to pay this price because they have no one backing them. Now
Yeah.
we have somebody backing them. We can charge whatever we want to charge. I think that's a fundamental problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and so this is one of the reasons why people fight against privatization of public services, public goods, right? So, like, what we're talking about from a higher ed standpoint is really is well, I guess this is the question. Is higher ed a public service? Is it a public good? I would argue yes. This is why we have such great work that's happening in community colleges and making sure that your citizenship is educated. It's generally in the best interest of most countries. Though we do see, and I would argue that historically, the United States has never really wanted to educate their citizenship. So we can go back to slaves, right? They never wanted slaves to read, to learn how to read and write. And they also didn't want people who were poor to really know how to read and write either. And in lots of ways, we're still seeing that to a degree. We're still seeing this idea that ignorance is exalted in this country, the ability to critically think and analyze and problem solve and not be a sheep that just follows blindly because of whatever kind of faith or ideology you've been raised in. You would be surprised, and we can talk about this another time. You'd be surprised some of the parents I've met of my students who are like, I'm not giving you this information because you're not going to college. We don't want you think you're better than us. Like, all the attitude around who's better than who and having ego in the way and afraid. I think this is really fear based, but this
Yeah.
fear that, if someone expands their world outside of the family, outside of the community with the local norms, that they will come back and sort of maybe debunk. And I think that's true. I think you'll see a lot of people who do go to college, not because they're being indoctrinated, because they're just meeting people from different places and understanding and having a wider understanding of life. Then they come back with ideas around, oh, well, maybe the norms that I grew up with are not the best norms to have grown up with, and maybe I would love to bring that information back to the community. And then you've got people who've put a power base behind others' ignorance, who are going to fight against that. And I think we're actually seeing that really play out majorly in the political standpoint right now. I think that is one of the major drivers behind the divisiveness that is happening in the United States, is this dumbing down of education that has happened, I would say, basically since the 80s, but certainly was vamped up during No Child Left Behind. Everything was just about memorization and teaching to the test, and not really ensuring that students enjoyed their educational experiences. I think that there was a time where people really loved to learn, and there was this just a beauty about like learning just for learning's sake. Just go to the library, just read, just enjoy,
Yeah.
be creative, just go
Yes.
learn stuff.
Yeah.
And that joy has been, and oftentimes I think has been taken out, especially from a public school standpoint. and it's really unfortunate to see when you're in the schools, and you could be, and get me wrong, we have amazing, this is why we're doing the Invaluable Educator. We have amazing educators that are really trying to teach, who are trying to instill the joy of learning, but the institution and the framework itself makes it very difficult, which is why I started from scheduling, because scheduling sets the norm around what actually happens throughout the day. And how people can interact and act with each other. So we can also talk about the school rules that happen, how you set up people's classroom. And I talked about like the feeling you get when you walk into a space, how the students are allowed to maneuver within a space, how they're allowed to interact with each other. And of course, don't get me wrong, there's obviously, you want to redirect if there's any negativity, if there's any bullying, but generally speaking, you also want them to figure out how do I problem solve? How do I have some real conflict resolution? How do I self-soothe and self-regulate my emotions? And the students really don't get a chance to do that in school. And what we see now, I think, is we're seeing a generation of people, of human beings, who are absolutely not self-regulated, who are entitled, who don't know how to wait, who are not patient. I mean, all the things that we're seeing play out in the school system, we're seeing as adults, and it's becoming a major problem in the ways that we interact with one another. The lack of empathy, the lack of care, the lack of compassion for each other as human beings is frankly astounding.
That's so interesting that you say that, because those skills that you just mentioned are skills that we were actually just learning in the McKinsey Forward program.
Mm.
And it's like, imagine if you can have curriculums like that embedded into the education system. Imagine that we can have like frameworks like, their APR framework, awareness and pausing and reflecting, embedded in like everyday like schooling. Like there's like a session where the students are aware of how they're feeling when they're starting the class. They pause, they reflect, are those feelings legitimate? Like I did a similar exercise when I was in college. A bit of vulnerability here, right? I was studying computer science, and I just kind of felt like nobody understood me. I kind of felt like not the smartest, even though I knew that wasn't necessarily like true. It's that I just wasn't supported. Didn't really have much of a didn't really have much of a network within the major to kind of lean back on when it came to things I didn't know and where I wanted to collaborate. And I just had all these false narratives about myself going on in my mind. And I went to the Black Latino Student Union just mental health session. I wasn't going to go initially, but then I just kind of felt convicted. I was like, okay, you know what? Let me just go to this thing. It's fine. I'm going to go settle down here. Feel like God convicted me. And I went, and it was one of the most beautiful things, because I got to face those lies head on. That, no, you don't know what you're doing, or that you're not smart enough, or you don't deserve to be here. I got to address each of those. I got to pause and reflect and ask, hey, is this true? Is this something that I'm just saying because of maybe how I've experienced this place or how I've been treated? Or am I actually not intelligent enough to master coding? Am I not intelligent enough to make it past, right? And good news to you guys watching, I graduated, designed my own major as well, and I taught coding as well. But it's just things like that, those frameworks that will help you to stop and evaluate where you are, that students really need as well. And that's not in the curriculum because of the scheduling too.
Well, it's not in the curriculum, yes, because of the scheduling, but also it's not in the curriculum, back to where we're talking about monopoly and the privatization of education. So it's not in the scheduling because everything is now tied to testing. Teacher evaluations are tied to testing. School ratings are tied to testing. So everything is tied to testing, and testing right now, we're only testing on people's ability to read, write, and do math. That's the core. As you get older, sometimes you might do some sciences, depending, or etc. But that's the core. And so when everything is tied to that, then you have to create a schedule that will allow for an outcome that is tied to that. But we keep seeing this over and over again. That testing is not a correlation on a person's intelligence, ability to learn. And again, it's not a correlation around how successful they're actually going to be in society. And so we as a society and as an educational system, we have to say, okay, testing doesn't make sense. Okay, I'm all for, like, not every school is for every child, but maybe the ways that we decide who we let into certain buildings or certain systems or which schools they go to, we figure out another way. But maybe it's portfolio based, maybe it's based off of a
Right.
interview, maybe there's an opportunity where students can do peer reviews around like each other. Like,
Right.
oh, for example, I love having Jeff in the class because he's always so helpful and he's so, he's always willing to help, right? So like there's these like qualitative things, and I think if we actually align school in a
Mhm.
way like you do like a 360 review in work, you might start finding more correlation and more happiness around work environments and people who are able to, again, have a lot of these human forward skills, these soft skills. It is very rare that any business cares about whether or not you know physics. I mean, unless you're going in to be some kind of engineer or
Rocket scientist.
yeah, that's like something you need, but like ain't nobody else caring about whether or not you have physics. I remember back in the day on my resume, I used to write, oh, my GPA and I graduated cum laude. And I was like, who cares really at the end of the day? Let me take that all off. That's so irrelevant at this point in time. So okay, I can get good grades. All that really means is that like I know how to read a book and take a test. It doesn't actually mean that I'm
Mm,
a good
mm.
worker and I am someone you can rely on, or like you have no idea whether or not I'm a punctual person, or you can rely on me, whether I'm loyal, whether or not
Right.
I'm a team player. Like nothing about my grades tell you that. It just tells you like, oh,
Yeah.
I took these subjects and I did well in them.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And part of that is, I just think like naturally people in my family tend to be intelligent. So a lot of it, my friends will tell you, I hardly ever studied. I was like, I don't study. So again, it doesn't even show like that I have any sort of like
Right.
real skills
Right.
to be successful, right? And I think that is the piece that we really need to start divorcing ourselves from. But again, it's structural. So in order for us to have the kind of classes that you're talking about, to have more movement in this space, to have more physical activity for our students, and really lean into the arts, the creative arts, musicality, and drawing and creativity and all of that, we have to say and decide like testing is not that important. Though the big publishing companies have their lobbyists that talk to politicians who create these sort of policies,
Mhm.
and they're big lobbies, and so it's a difficult battle to have
Mhm.
when politics is so tied to corporate dollars. And so that's another problem, and this is not the point of the Invaluable Educator, but when you have that mixing of public good with private funds, the United States is like the prime example of what absolutely can go wrong when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Because listen, when it comes to these private dollars, these companies, they want workers. They want people being trained into their system, right? And it's like still, I feel like you can have excellent education and you could still have companies that have employees. You know what I'm saying? Successful employees.
Yeah,
It's just that we need to move away from this scarcity mindset that if people are empowered and educated, that they will not come back to build. You know what I'm saying? They will not come back to build existing companies, because even to build your own company, many consultants have gone into a company first,
yeah,
learned the skills, and then they build their own company. So those companies are still benefiting. But I think it happens when you have this almost greedy monopoly kind of mindset where you're like, we need to have a monopoly on the education system and a monopoly on the workforce, and
yeah.
then you see things happening similar to what we're seeing today with the mass layoffs and people wondering, where do I go now? Like, because they weren't prepared by the education system for this kind of an event.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. These mass layoffs and people are scared. Well, it goes back to exactly what I said. You were designed to become a robot, to take all the
Yeah.
things that make us human beings out and make us more robotic and more rote. And so now with AI and people losing their jobs to a machine, quote unquote, that's the false narrative. The real narrative should be, how come I don't have the skill set to pivot, to be creative,
Right.
to analyze, to figure out different ways that I can move and jive through the world. And also as a people and as a society, is it now time for us to do a reassessment of what we actually value as a people, and then how do we go about making that change?
Yeah.
And again, and I bring it up quite a bit. I think that the younger generations are very in tune to social awareness, what's going on socially, and when they're in school, a lot of times they ask the hard questions. Why am I learning this? Is this important to what's going on in society right now? I don't just want a job. I want a job that has meaning. I want my life to be meaningful. And
Yes.
we're seeing so many more of those types of conversation that is happening at younger ages, which I think is beautiful. So I do think that there is going to be a time where we're going to see this sort of, I don't want to say utopian society, but certainly a society rooted in humanity. It might take a few generations for us to get there. And like I said, right now we're in a time of upheaval and frankly crisis, but that's also the time where beautiful and positive change can come out. And being in the educational system and having the ability to go into schools has been a blessing to see, oh, there is actually hope for the future.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, yes, yes. This is a great topic, and I love what it evolved into, and just all the nuances. I feel like this has really opened up some good ground, especially for like future conversations. That I feel like not only we will have on this, but that the people who are watching and tuning in can now begin to have on this because they have the information and
yeah.
knowledge is power when it comes to making these changes. So thank you.
Yeah, so I would encourage everyone who is working with school age children, whether you're a parent or you're a guardian or your grandparent, auntie, uncle, whatever. If you know school age children, ask them to send you their schedule so you can see actually what is on their schedule, how often they ask to sit down, how much time do they have for transition, and then they only have 20 minutes to eat. I just it is the most
Mm, mm,
fascinating thing. And that's generally public schools. But then if you know anybody who goes to a private school, look at their schedule and try to think to yourself, why is it
mm,
so different? What's really going on here?
mm.
What's happening at these different institutions?
Okay, okay. I think that might need to be the next topic, public versus private. What do you think?
I'm down for it. Yes, we can totally do public versus private school. I love it. I'm a private school proponent and a child of private schools.
Mm,
But of course, I work a lot with public schools. So I have a lot of thoughts here.
mm. Okay, okay. Very, very cool. All
Awesome.
right.
Awesome.
Nice.
So I think that's it. So that's it for the Invaluable Educator. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Until next time, where we talk public versus private. I love that as a topic. So thanks so much, Jeff.
All right, all
Peace
right.
out, everyone.
Take care, everyone. All right, that was good.